There are always going to be moments where you feel as though a story is being told about some caricature of you that actually has nothing to do with you. And that can be really hard to reconcile. Then you're telling your own story. You're telling your own story and how you show up in the world, what you do. You actually don't need to say anything.
There's a strange silence in the royal corridors, a silence that hides more than it reveals. Beneath the glamour of palace life and the soft glow of charity galas lies a series of coincidences too precise to ignore. The question that now echoes through the years feels almost absurd in its simplicity. Could Meghan Markle have truly not recognized Prince Andrew? A man whose face had graced headlines for decades, who stood beside the Queen during nearly every major royal event, suddenly became, in her account, a stranger. That moment, an alleged whisper to Prince Harry, "Who's that next to your grandmother?" felt innocent, perhaps even charming. Yet for many observers, it was the first clue that something didn't add up. Long before Meghan stepped into the global spotlight, there were fragments, receipts, travel logs, gala lists, and half-vanished interviews that painted the outline of a much more complex life. These weren't the random moves of a struggling actress. They were deliberate choices aligning her path with figures who operated far beyond Hollywood's reach. In the early 2000s, Meghan was not yet the Duchess the world would know, but her ambitions had already begun to cross borders and blur lines. She moved within circles where visibility was currency and proximity to power opened doors no talent agent ever could. Rumors began to circulate among London's press long before Meghan's royal connection was official. One journalist recalled a quiet meeting in a Soho bar, a pre-fame Meghan recently divorced, speaking softly of opportunity reinvention and the British elite. She knew exactly which names to drop, which stories to tell, and more importantly, which ones to withhold. It was not just charm, it was calculation. The kind of foresight that turns introductions into headlines years later. Every public detail seemed to lead to another hidden behind a polite smile and impeccable poise. Even her supposed semester in Argentina raised questions. It wasn't the cultural exchange it appeared to be. Her travels led her from Buenos Aires to Spain without any academic record of attendance. No classmates, no host family, no paper trail. Just photographs from yachts along the Mediterranean, subtle, mentions of friends abroad, and whispers that she had met people who would later change her life. Among those names was Joan Elias, a businessman tied closely to Prince Andrew's network. He was known for his lavish trips through Southeast Asia, for friendships with high society, and for his uncanny ability to appear wherever influence gathered. Witnesses claimed Meghan was among the guests of these quiet voyages, a young woman surrounded by men of wealth and status. It may have seemed like coincidence. Yet as the years unfolded, those same names, Elias Andrew, the York family, would surface again, threaded through her story like a watermark visible only when held to the light. To some, this was simply the nature of celebrity, the endless dance between ambition and access. To others, it felt far more strategic, as though Meghan had studied the architecture of the British elite long before she ever met its most eligible prince. One cannot help but ask, was it destiny or design? The royal image, carefully constructed by tradition, leaves little room for unpredictability. Yet every dynasty has its wild card, the one figure who enters quietly, disrupts the hierarchy, and forces the system to adapt. In this case, that figure came from outside, armed with beauty intelligence and an instinct for survival in a world ruled by optics. What began as a seemingly chance romance would soon expose the fragile intersection of image ambition and secrecy within Britain's oldest institution. And as the threads of her story continue to unravel, one truth becomes unavoidable. The line between coincidence and connection is far thinner than anyone wants to admit. Ambition has many faces, but within elite circles, it often hides behind charm and coincidence. Meghan Markle's ascent from a little-known actress to a duchess was not a fairy tale written overnight. It was a story meticulously constructed piece by piece through access, proximity, and performance. Every decision from her, travels to her choice of friends, appeared to build towards something larger, something only she could see at the time. In the early 2010s, while the world barely noticed her name in the credits of Suits, her movements painted a very different picture. She was already crossing paths with the same figures who would later define her royal narrative. Before Meghan became a headline, she was quietly learning how the world of influence worked. In Los Angeles, she mingled in the entertainment scene. In London, she studied how the press shaped public perception. Every dinner, every gala, every strategic introduction brought her closer to the center of power. It wasn't luck. It was navigation. Observers later noticed how easily she adapted to each new circle, how seamlessly she blended into conversations about philanthropy, fashion, and diplomacy long before she was invited to any palace. Then came the curious string of appearances that linked her name to places far beyond Hollywood's scope. Hong Kong, New York, Istanbul, and the Mediterranean, all before she had any legitimate reason to be there professionally. The pattern began to form a constellation of elite gatherings that connected her not to her acting peers, but to royals' financiers and society's inner sanctums. It was during these years that her name allegedly surfaced in whispers at private clubs, especially those frequented by the York family. Prince Andrew's presence in those same settings was more than incidental. His reputation for cultivating friendships in high society was well known, often accompanied by names that would later make headlines for darker reasons. Meghan's overlap with those circles was striking. At the time, few noticed the connection. Today, looking back through event archives and travel records, the timeline feels deliberate, as though she was quietly orbiting a system she planned one day to enter. At the 2013 Novak Djokovic Foundation Gala in New York, the room overflowed with icons Naomi Campbell, Anna Wintour, and Prince Andrew among them. Meghan's appearance there went almost unnoticed. No official photos, no press coverage. Yet several insiders later confirmed that she had attended seated not far from the royal contingent. It was the perfect position, visible enough to observe, invisible enough to avoid scrutiny. She was learning the rhythm of the elite, the subtle codes of access that determined who was let in and who remained outside. The same year, Suits gained moderate traction, and with it, Meghan's public profile began to rise. Yet she continued to frequent places few television actors could afford: private members' clubs like Soho House, where influence flowed more freely than champagne. These venues were gateways to quiet power networks, where business, politics, and royalty converged under candlelight and discretion. It was there that Meghan met individuals who would later bridge her world to Prince Harry's. To outsiders, it might seem like coincidence. To those who understand how visibility works among the elite, it looked like a blueprint. Meghan was not simply socializing, she was positioning. She built credibility by proximity, aligning herself with humanitarian celebrities and minor aristocrats. Every appearance was a lesson in optics: be photographed just enough to intrigue, never enough to invite questions. Yet beneath that strategic calm, there lingered an unsettling truth about the environment she was stepping into. Many of the figures who surrounded her at these gatherings would later become controversial, some even disgraced. Names tied to financial scandals, human trafficking investigations, and the shadow of Jeffrey Epstein. Connections that, in retrospect, make her silence on certain topics feel less like modesty and more like avoidance. It was during this period that Meghan's professional ambitions and social mobility began to intertwine irreversibly. She wasn't merely chasing fame anymore. She was navigating influence, understanding that true power didn't reside in Hollywood, but in the quiet exchanges that shaped nations and fortunes. And as the years went on, those quiet exchanges brought her closer to the heart of Britain's royal machine, whether by fate or by design. The story of her ambition, then, is not just about personal success. It is a reflection of how modern celebrity and old-world aristocracy began to merge in the 21st century, a convergence that would redefine the monarchy's image and spark one of the most divisive public debates of the modern royal era. Because behind the smile, behind the curated photographs and perfectly timed charity projects, there remained one persistent question. How much of Meghan's rise was destiny and how much was deliberate orchestration? In the years leading up to her engagement, Meghan Markle's movements began to mirror the flight paths of the powerful. Cities separated by continents seemed to converge in her story: Hong Kong, New York, Istanbul, each a waypoint in a much larger pattern. Publicly, she appeared to be an actress searching for her next big break. Privately, the connections forming around her suggested a far more complex trajectory. Her ascent seemed synchronized with certain figures who would later define royal controversy, individuals like Prince Andrew, whose own international activities raised both eyebrows and suspicions. In late 2012, Meghan's name appeared in passing on the guest list for a Hong Kong business event, an odd destination for a TV actress with no formal business ties. The timing was peculiar. At that exact period, Prince Andrew was on an official visit to the same city meeting financiers and dignitaries. Though no photographs ever emerged, witnesses reported that Meghan was seen at the same hotel, attending adjacent social functions hosted by overlapping sponsors. Later, when questioned about the trip, she offered only vague remarks about exploring opportunities abroad. The footage of that interview has since vanished from public archives, leaving behind only speculation. Coincidence, perhaps, but those coincidences multiplied. Months later, she surfaced in New York for the Djokovic Foundation Gala, an event saturated with celebrities, philanthropists, and royals. Again, Andrew's presence was noted. Again, Meghan's was unofficial, acknowledged by insiders, erased by the press. These intersections began to form a parallel storyline, one that few in the media dared to connect. The more one examines the chronology, the clearer the pattern becomes. Meghan was not stumbling into royal circles, she was navigating them. The overlap with Andrew's sphere was neither isolated nor accidental. Even before the world associated her name with Prince Harry, she was already a familiar presence in environments frequented by his uncle and his extended network of benefactors and acquaintances. This was a world built on introductions, quiet favors, and untraceable invitations. By 2014, Meghan's proximity to power had deepened through one key institution, Soho House. More than a club, Soho House was a cultural command center where the global elite mingled without the constraints of press or protocol. Members included actors, financiers, models, and royals, each with something to offer, each searching for the next advantageous alliance. It was here that Meghan's transition from actress to influencer accelerated. She learned the nuances of discretion, the importance of aligning image with opportunity, and most critically, the art of blending in among those who ruled the world behind closed doors. When Soho House expanded to Istanbul in 2015, Meghan attended the opening. Among the guests were figures tied to the same elite web that had shadowed her for years. Reports suggested the York family maintained strong links to the venue through shared friends and benefactors. Meghan's attendance was barely mentioned, her name excluded from media lists. But in private circles, she was recognized that American actress as one guest recalled always around the right people at the right time. The deeper one digs, the more this story begins to resemble not coincidence, but choreography. At every major juncture of her pre-royal life, Meghan appeared where influence concentrated. From yacht gatherings in the Mediterranean to charity galas in New York, she was always close enough to royalty to observe, but distant enough to deny. The question is not whether she and Prince Andrew ever met, it is how often their paths aligned under circumstances too parallel to dismiss. As the pieces align, one cannot help but sense a narrative hidden in plain sight, the careful construction of proximity. Meghan's ability to exist within royal-adjacent environments without attracting attention was in itself a form of mastery. For someone so new to British society, she understood its codes remarkably well. And yet behind these movements lay another truth: this world was fragile and every association carried risk. The same networks that opened doors to luxury and legitimacy were also those later tainted by scandal, financial manipulation, human exploitation, and moral collapse. Prince Andrew's entanglement in the Epstein affair would explode into public consciousness only years later. But even before that reckoning, the elite ecosystem he moved within was known for its shadows. In hindsight, Meghan's quiet presence in those same corridors of privilege seems less like coincidence and more like silent preparation. By the time she met Prince Harry, she already understood the terrain of influence, the alliances, the media tactics, the rules of survival. What seemed like a whirlwind romance may in reality have been the culmination of years spent navigating the invisible map of power. Was it chance, or was it a script she had been perfecting all along? The key to understanding Meghan Markle's remarkable social rise lies in a single name that kept reappearing in the background of her story, Soho House. This was not just a private club. It was an invisible empire of connection designed for those who valued influence more than fame. Its branches in London, Istanbul, New York, and Los Angeles were sanctuaries for the world's elite. Here, film stars mingled with royalty tycoons, negotiated behind velvet curtains, and journalists traded discretion for access. For Meghan, it was the stage on which opportunity met design. By the time she walked into Soho House for the first time, her trajectory was already bending away from Hollywood and toward the corridors of global power. Membership in that circle granted her entry to a world few outsiders ever glimpsed, a place where appearances mattered, but silence mattered more. Among its regulars were members of the York family, international financiers, and powerful intermediaries tied to global foundations. One of those financiers, Ron Burkle, would later become instrumental in arranging private transport and introductions for her. Burkle, co-owner of Soho House and a close friend of both royals and billionaires, was the man who quietly bridged two worlds that should never have collided. When Meghan attended the opening of Soho House Istanbul in 2015, she was photographed standing near Oscar-winning actor Eddie Redmayne. The image made its way into the press, but the caption omitted her name entirely. It was as if she had been there yet wasn't meant to be seen. That moment captured the paradox of her life at that time, present in elite spaces, but cloaked in deliberate anonymity. Each appearance carried the precision of a strategist. She was never too visible, never too obscure, always positioned just right to observe, to learn, and to blend in. The same pattern repeated in charity events, fashion weeks, and yacht gatherings along the Mediterranean. Her name often appeared only in after-party whispers or untagged social media photos. Sources later suggested she attended events hosted by associates of Prince Andrew, such as businessmen Ewan Alash and Joan Elias, both figures deeply connected to royal-adjacent ventures and philanthropy networks. These were not random encounters. Each connection subtly drew her closer to the social orbit of Britain's most controversial aristocrats. Even her friendships seemed to form along those lines. Karine Shuliak, one of Jeffrey Epstein's last known companions, appeared in photographs alongside Meghan during a Mediterranean yacht trip. Also present was Deepak Chopra, a spiritual leader later celebrated in Meghan's public humanitarian image. But what many didn't know was that Chopra's name, too, appeared in documents related to Epstein-linked charitable entities, a tangled overlap of influence, philanthropy, and moral ambiguity. In that rarefied world, optics were everything, and associations could be both a ladder and a liability. Through it all, Meghan remained publicly unscathed. Her story was carefully curated: the humanitarian, the actress, the activist. Yet behind the curtain, her network was intertwined with individuals whose reputations would later implode. The irony of this duality, purity of image, amidst a background of scandal, only heightened her mystique. To the casual observer, it looked like destiny. To those paying closer attention, it resembled deliberate engineering. The culmination of this strategic evolution was visible during the 2017 Jamaica wedding of one of Harry's friends. While Prince Harry flew economy, Meghan arrived via private jet arranged by Ron Burkle himself. The guest list read like a who's who of royal insiders: Princess Eugenie Sarah Ferguson and, according to certain accounts, Prince Andrew. Again, no official photos captured the Yorks at the event, but multiple attendees confirmed their discreet presence. Meghan had once again placed herself at the intersection of two worlds, the visible and the invisible, the modern and the monarchical. Soho House was her training ground, but also her shield. Within its walls, she learned how to navigate rooms where silence was currency. She understood that survival in those spaces required both charm and caution. And so, as her public image transformed from actress to duchess, the skills honed in that private network became invaluable. She had learned to operate like those who ruled by perception, creating a version of herself that could thrive under scrutiny while concealing the complexity beneath. In retrospect, it becomes clear that her rise was neither naive nor accidental. It was calculated, elegant, and dangerous. She entered the royal institution not as an outsider, but as someone who had already mastered its unspoken rules through years of proximity. And yet the same web that elevated her also threatened to unravel her. Because once the public began to trace the outlines of her hidden associations, the Soho House connections, the discreet introductions, the erased photographs, the myth of chance began to fade. What emerged instead was a portrait of precision, a woman who understood the value of invisibility in a world obsessed with visibility. Every great narrative hides its missing pages. In Meghan Markle's story, those pages lie scattered across Spain, Thailand, and the Mediterranean months of her life that seem to vanish from official timelines. The absence of detail is itself a kind of evidence, one that raises questions about what was erased and why. Her public biography tells of a young woman studying international relations, working briefly in Buenos Aires, and returning to the United States to pursue acting. But between those milestones are gaps precisely where the most intriguing rumors live. The so-called semester abroad in Spain remains one of the most puzzling. Officially, it was a cultural exchange at IE University, a prestigious institution that later claimed to have hosted her. Yet no classmates, no host families, and no records of coursework have ever surfaced. No photographs exist of her on campus, and the university itself has quietly removed mentions of her from promotional material. What remains are whispers of luxury yachts, Mediterranean coastlines, and mysterious benefactors. Around that same time in the early 2000s, Prince Andrew's network of associates figures like businessman Joanna Lash and financier Joan Elias were known to travel through Europe and Asia, hosting gatherings aboard private vessels. It was a world of secrecy and indulgence, accessible only to those with invitations from billionaires or royals. Witnesses later recalled seeing a young American woman who resembled Meghan among the guests, though no confirmations were ever made. The photographs that might have clarified the story have either disappeared or remain buried in private archives. What can be pieced together from social media posts, travel records, and sorority testimonies suggests that Meghan went off the grid for several months during university, telling friends she was exploring Thailand and the Mediterranean with influential friends. The phrase seemed innocuous at the time. In hindsight, it feels like code for something much more strategic, a period of transformation in which an ambitious young woman discovered how the machinery of influence operated up close. Later, those same names and destinations would reappear in different contexts. Karine Shuliak, the woman once linked to Epstein and photographed alongside Meghan on a yacht, would later resurface in tabloids tied to investigations into Epstein's social ring. Deepak Chopra, whose mentorship Meghan publicly celebrated in her 40x40 campaign, was connected through charitable organizations that overlapped with foundations funded by some of those same elites. None of this proves malice or misconduct, but it demonstrates a consistent pattern, an uncanny proximity to controversial figures at pivotal points in her evolution. By the time she emerged as a global celebrity, those early chapters had been airbrushed from her story. The missing months became anecdotes about travel and personal growth. The erased interviews, like her 2012 Hong Kong appearance, now vanished from the internet, were replaced by newer, more controlled narratives. Even the photographs from Soho House and yacht trips disappeared, either deleted by hosts or quietly suppressed by media outlets wary of legal ramifications. It was an editing process worthy of Hollywood refine the script, remove the noise control the audience's gaze. But history resists perfection. Each attempt to erase creates a void, and every void invites curiosity. Why, for instance, did no journalist question the sudden disappearance of her early travel photos from public view? Why did none of her university peers confirm her time in Spain? Why were so many of her early acquaintances reluctant to speak on record once she became a duchess? Silence, in this case, became its own form of testimony. As the royal years unfolded, these omissions took on new weight. They weren't just gaps in a timeline, they were clues to a methodology. Meghan had learned early that perception could be sculpted, that inconvenient details could be neutralized, and that the absence of evidence was sometimes more powerful than its presence. This awareness of image management would become central to her later conflicts with the British press, as though she had anticipated the scrutiny long before it arrived. And within that awareness lies the uncomfortable parallel to Prince Andrew himself. Both figures mastered the art of controlled visibility, appearing when necessary, disappearing when threatened. Both were drawn into networks that blurred the boundaries between charity luxury and moral compromise. Both became symbols of a modern monarchy struggling to manage its own contradictions. In the end, the mystery of Meghan's missing months serves as a microcosm of the entire royal narrative, an empire of appearances built atop layers of omission. The truth may never be fully known, but the pattern remains undeniable. Behind every polished image lies a carefully edited reality. As the story moves toward its final act, what remains is not scandal, but strategy. Meghan Markle's path from yacht decks and Soho House corridors to the gates of Windsor Castle reveals a portrait of precision rather than accident. The same elements that once raised eyebrows now form a larger mosaic of how power perception and persistence interact in the modern age. Her proximity to Prince Andrew's circle was never publicly acknowledged, yet its fingerprints linger in the form of mutual acquaintances, overlapping timelines, and erased records. What once seemed implausible now feels inevitable that Meghan had already been orbiting the royal world long before she officially entered it. When the engagement to Prince Harry was announced in late 2017, the narrative of destiny took center stage. The press called it a love story. For a new generation, a woman of color, and an English prince defying centuries of convention. The palace projected an image of inclusivity and renewal. But behind that fairy tale announcement, the machinery of reputation management was already working overtime. The Duchess's previous decade was scrubbed clean, leaving only fragments acceptable to public consumption humanitarian efforts, television roles, and curated soundbites about empowerment. Gone were the photos of yacht gatherings, the unexplained travels, and the shadowy benefactors who had once provided her access to elite spaces. In the years that followed, both Meghan and Prince Andrew would become flashpoints for very different controversies, yet united by a single thread: the collision between secrecy and visibility. Andrew's scandal, driven by his association with Jeffrey Epstein, shattered the monarchy's illusion of moral distance. Meghan's conflict with the royal institution, framed as a struggle against bias and media intrusion, exposed the monarchy's inability to adapt to modern scrutiny. Two figures, at opposite ends of the royal spectrum, one born into privilege, the other mastering it, each challenged the institution's myth of purity in their own way. What makes Meghan's story particularly cinematic is the tension between control and consequence. Her rise demonstrated that image could be weaponized, that calculated transparency could mask deeper opacity. She understood that the royal machine thrived on performance, and she played her part flawlessly until she no longer needed the script. When the performance ended and she and Harry stepped back from royal duties, it was framed as rebellion. Yet to some observers, it felt like the final act of a plan years in the making, a transition from the gilded cage to the global stage. Public opinion divided sharply. To her supporters, Meghan became a symbol of independence, a woman who refused to be silenced. To critics, she embodied manipulation, someone who had used the monarchy as a ladder and discarded it once the view was sufficient. The truth likely lies somewhere in between. But regardless of where one stands, the architecture of her journey remains extraordinary. She had navigated one of the most impenetrable social systems on Earth and emerged not only visible but powerful. That in itself was unprecedented. In the end, the saga of Meghan and Andrew's intersecting worlds serves as a mirror for a fading empire. The British monarchy, once untouchable, now operates under the relentless light of modern media. Secrets that once stayed buried beneath chandeliers and private jets now resurface as digital evidence, archived screenshots, and anonymous testimonies. Every erased photograph, every vanished interview becomes part of the story it was meant to conceal. And within that reflection lies the uncomfortable realization that institutions built on image cannot survive without constant reinvention. As history unfolds, the question remains, was Meghan Markle the disruptor who forced the monarchy to evolve? Or simply the latest in a long line of outsiders who learned to play its game better than anyone before her? Perhaps both can be true. What is certain is that her journey from whispered questions beside the Queen to global media dominance reveals more about the fragility of power than the resilience of fame. For all its controversy, the tale of Meghan and Andrew is not about scandal alone, it is about systems colliding. The old aristocracy meeting modern ambition. The unseen meeting the undeniable. And like every great transformation in history, it leaves behind more questions than answers. What lessons will future generations draw from this? That image can rewrite legacy, that silence can be as revealing as confession, or that in a world where perception rules truth itself has become the rarest luxury of all. The intertwined stories of Meghan Markle and Prince Andrew illustrate the slow erosion of secrecy within Britain's royal hierarchy. Long before she became a duchess, Meghan's travels associations and access to elite circles placed her within the gravitational pull of royal influence. Whether by intention or coincidence, she mastered the same techniques of discretion and visibility that once shielded aristocrats from exposure. Soho House private jets, Mediterranean yachts and global charity galas became the invisible classrooms where she learned the unspoken codes of power. By the time she entered the royal fold, Meghan had already perfected the art of narrative control. She understood the media's hunger for myth and the value of selective vulnerability. Her rise paralleled the monarchy's decline in privacy, exposing the contradictions of an institution trying to modernize without losing mystique. Meanwhile, Prince Andrew's own trajectory from respected envoy to disgraced royal revealed how quickly prestige can decay when privilege meets accountability. Together, their stories form a cautionary parable about the cost of image building in an age of digital transparency. The tale is cinematic not because of its glamour, but because of its symmetry. Both Meghan and Andrew used access to navigate the same social labyrinth, yet emerged as opposites, one vilified for daring to reshape the narrative, the other condemned for failing to control it. Their convergence underscores how the monarchy's greatest strength, its aura of exclusivity, has become its weakness. In a connected world, secrets can no longer hide behind curtains of tradition. Ultimately, Meghan's rise represents both ambition realized and innocence lost. She stepped into a system designed to contain her and instead forced it to confront its own obsolescence. Whether viewed as manipulative or visionary, her story redefines what it means to wield power in the modern era, not through titles or inheritance, but through mastery of perception. Perhaps that is the final lesson of this saga, that in the kingdom of appearances, truth is negotiable, and history is written not by those who rule, but by those who understand how to be seen.